The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft rhythmic sound of a heart monitor. Golden afternoon light filtered through the blinds, spilling warmth onto the pale sheets where two women held hands. Eleanor Montrose sat beside her oldest friend, Margaret Hart, who was fading like a candle in its final hour. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, mingling with the faint scent of roses from a vase on the table. Margaret's breath was shallow, her voice fragile. "Please, promise me," she whispered. "Promise me she won't be alone. My daughter deserves someone kind." Eleanor leaned closer, tears pricking her eyes. "You know my son Margaret. He doesn't believe in marriage and love. He has no room in his heart for anything but business." Margaret smiled weakly, her voice a trembling whisper. "Then let him see it through her. Let him see Lena. Make him remember what love looks like." Eleanor's chest tightened. She squeezed Margaret's hand and whispered, "Then she'll have my son's name. I swear it." Margaret's lips parted in a small, grateful smile before her breathing faded. The heart monitor let out a long, steady tone, echoing through the golden stillness. Eleanor bowed her head, pressing her friend's cooling hand to her lips. "Rest now. I'll keep my word." The next scene opened to the sound of rain. A row of black umbrellas lined the cemetery. The Montrose crest gleamed faintly on the side of a waiting limousine. Alexander Montrose, 35 tall, perfectly composed, stood beside his mother in silence. His tailored black suit clung to his shoulders, raindrops rolling down his face. Like tears he refused to show. Reporters whispered behind the gate, their cameras catching glimpses of the billionaire who never smiled. He looked at the coffin as it lowered into the earth, his jaw tight. Voice over Emma. He didn't believe in promises, but that day he kept one. Later that evening, the Montrose mansion in Manhattan glowed under the storm. In the grand study, Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her reflection flickering in the flames. When her son entered, the sound of his polished shoes against the marble floor echoed the tension in the air. He set down his coat, his expression unreadable. "You want me to marry a stranger?" he asked, his tone half disbelief, half annoyance. Eleanor turned to face him, a worn photograph in her trembling hand. "Her name is Lena Hart. She's Margaret's daughter. She works in a diner. She's raising a boy alone." Alexander gave a short, cold laugh. "A waitress with a child? Mother, that's not marriage, that's charity." Eleanor met his gaze with quiet steel. "That child may not be hers, but her heart is made of something you've lost. Kindness." The fire crackled between them, a small reminder of the warmth neither of them had felt in years. Alexander walked toward the window, watching the lightning paint silver lines across the city skyline. "Kindness doesn't build an empire," he murmured. "Empires crumble," she said softly. "Hearts last longer." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass. The weight of his mother's words settled over him like an unwelcome truth. Finally, his shoulders dropped. "Fine, if it will make you happy, I'll marry her. But don't expect love." Eleanor's lips curved into a tired, knowing smile. "Love doesn't need your permission, my son." He said nothing. He reached for the photograph and studied it. The young woman's eyes were gentle, uncertain, but strong. Behind her, the glow of a diner sign flickered against the night. Something in that picture held him still. He set the photo down, his expression hardening again, unwilling to admit the stir of emotion it caused. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, echoing through the mansion's halls. Eleanor whispered to herself, more prayer than thought, May this promise bring you back to yourself. Alexander glanced at the window again, his reflection caught between firelight and rain. Voice over Emma. He didn't believe in love, not anymore. But sometimes duty leads the heart exactly where it never meant to go. Quote highlight. He didn't believe in love until duty led him to it. Morning light spilled through the front windows of a small diner by the lake, warming the scent of coffee and butter on the grill. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's name, where gossip moved faster than the steam that rose from the mugs. Behind the counter, Lena Hart moved quietly, her apron dusted with flour, her hair tied loosely at the back of her neck. Every motion she made was soft and deliberate, as if she were afraid to disturb the peace she'd built for herself. Her son, a 4-year-old boy named Noah, sat on a stool by the window, his small hands holding a crayon, his tongue peeking out in concentration as he drew. He was drawing their house a little square with a heart on top. Lena smiled when she looked at him. He was the only thing that had ever made her feel whole. Around her, the chatter of locals filled the air. A pair of old women whispered in the booth near the door. Poor thing, one said, shaking her head. That girl's been raising that boy alone since forever. The other sipped her coffee. No husband, no family. Still working every shift she can. Lena heard them but didn't react. The truth was simpler and heavier than the gossip she didn't have to defend herself to anyone. Noah was hers not by blood, but by choice, and choice she believed mattered more. Outside, clouds gathered over the lake. The bell above the diner door rang, and Lena looked up automatically, expecting another regular. Instead, she saw a tall, elegant woman standing in the doorway, holding a silver-tipped umbrella and wearing a dark coat that didn't belong in a place like this. The room fell quiet for a heartbeat. Eleanor Montrose stepped forward, her eyes studying the waitress, who had once been a child, playing in her garden years ago. "You look so much like your mother," she said softly. Lena froze her hands, tightening around a coffee pot. "Mrs. Montrose," she whispered, disbelief flickering across her face. "It's been years?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "Too many." She took a seat by the window, gesturing for Lena to sit. When Lena hesitated, she said gently, "Oh, please, my dear, just for a moment." Noah peeked from behind the counter, his eyes curious. Eleanor looked at him and smiled kindly. "He's beautiful. He's my whole world," Lena said quietly. "He looks like a child who's loved." Eleanor replied, her voice heavy with meaning. "Your mother would have been proud." The mention of her mother's name made Lena's heart twist. "You knew her better than I did, I think," she murmured. "She always spoke about you. She loved you deeply," Eleanor said. "And before she passed, she asked me for something, a promise." Lena frowned. "A promise?" Eleanor nodded. "She wanted me to make sure you were never alone, that you would have a home protection, a name that couldn't be taken away. My son will give you that." The words fell like cold rain. "Your son, Alexander Montrose," Eleanor said. "You'll be his wife." Lena's lips parted, but no sound came. The noise of the diner faded the world around her, narrowing to the steady rhythm of her heart. "Mrs. Montrose," she said finally, her voice trembling, "I think you misunderstand. I'm not the kind of woman your son should marry. I'm a waitress. I'm raising a child. People talk." Eleanor's eyes softened, but her tone remained resolute. "I don't care what people say. My friend made me promise, and I intend to keep it." Lena shook her head, glancing at Noah, who was now humming softly to himself, unaware of the storm brewing around his mother. Your son doesn't even know me. Why would he agree to something like this? Because he's his mother's son, Eleanor said simply, and because some promises carry more weight than desire. The older woman reached across the table, placing a gloved hand over Lena's trembling fingers. This isn't charity, Lena. It's legacy. For a long moment, Lena stared out the window. Rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. I don't want to be anyone's burden, she whispered. I've lived my life standing on my own. And yet, Eleanor said, even the strongest need shelter from the rain. Something in her tone broke through the wall Lena had built around her heart. Her eyes burned. She thought of the nights she'd spent watching Noah sleep, praying she'd never fail him. I don't know if I can be the kind of wife your son needs, she said softly. But I can promise you this, if he gives us a chance, I'll give him honesty and kindness. Eleanor smiled faintly. That will be enough. She stood smoothing her coat, her voice quieter now. I'll send someone to bring you to the city. You'll have a place there. She turned to Noah, who was now watching from his stool. Take care of your mother, little one. Noah grinned, holding up his drawing. I made a picture. It's our home. Eleanor looked at it and felt her throat tighten. The small crayon house had 3 figures holding hands. It's beautiful, she whispered. Maybe soon it will be bigger. As the door closed behind her, the bell chimed again. Lena stood motionless, her reflection trembling in the window. She whispered to herself, a Montrose wife, what would that even mean for someone like me? The rain outside grew heavier, washing the dust from the road, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the lake. She turned toward Noah and smiled faintly, brushing a curl from his forehead. Maybe this is the miracle I owe him, she said under her breath, though she wasn't sure whether she was speaking of the boy or the man she hadn't yet met. Voiceover Emma. Sometimes the kindest hearts are the ones that hurt the most in silence. Quote, highlight. Sometimes the kindest hearts are the ones that hurt the most in silence. The city was a symphony of motion when Alexander Montrose stepped out of his car. His black coat caught the wind as he entered the small lakeside diner that everyone in town called Lena's place, though her name wasn't on the sign. The scent of coffee and grilled bread hit him first, followed by the quiet hum of a life he didn't understand. The waitress behind the counter turned when the door opened, her eyes widening slightly. For a second, Lena thought he'd walked into the wrong place. His suit alone was worth more than her yearly salary. His posture too composed for such a humble space. He scanned the room once before locking eyes with her. Their worlds met in silence. Mrs. Montrose sent me, he said, his voice low and even. Lena wiped her hands on her apron, her heart beating faster. I know. She motioned to a corner booth. Would you like some coffee? He shook his head and sat. No, thank you. Let's not pretend this is a social visit. She joined him reluctantly, her hands folding on the table. He studied her face as if searching for something he didn't want to find. I won't waste your time. My mother made a promise to yours. I intend to honor it. But I want to be clear, this marriage will be a formality. There will be no expectations beyond that. His tone was businesslike, detached, yet not cruel. Lena nodded slowly. And you believe that's what your mother's friend wanted, a contract? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. What she wanted no longer matters. What remains is obligation. The word sounded cold, but not heartless. You'll be taken care of, he continued. You and the boy. You'll have security, a home, everything you need. She looked down, tracing the grain of the table with her fingertip. That's more than anyone's ever done for us, she said quietly. There was no bitterness, only truth. He looked at her again, seeing the calm steadiness of someone who'd survived too much to be impressed by wealth. For a brief moment, something inside him stirred something he didn't like. We'll meet tomorrow, he said, standing. Noon, the Grandview Hotel. Bring whatever papers you have. Birth certificates, identification, anything necessary for the registration. He placed a sleek black card on the table with his number embossed in silver. Lena didn't touch it. You make it sound like a transaction, she murmured. He paused, his expression unreadable. That's what promises are when love isn't part of them. He turned and left, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and the echo of his words. The next day, the hotel lobby was a world of marble and quiet opulence. Lena felt small, walking through it, her simple blue dress brushing against polished floors that reflected the chandelier's glow. Her hands trembled as she clutched the documents Eleanor's assistant had helped her gather. She caught sight of herself in the glass doors, nervous, ordinary, a woman, out of place in a billionaire's world. Alexander was waiting by the window, a folder in his hand, his profile cut against the skyline of the city. You came, he said without looking at her. I keep my promises, she replied softly. He gestured to a chair and she sat. His lawyer, a man in his 50s, laid the papers out with mechanical precision. This agreement outlines the arrangement. There will be no financial obligation beyond what's listed. The marriage will be recognized publicly, but any future decisions remain at Mr. Montrose's discretion. Lena listened, her face calm though her stomach churned. And what about choice, she asked. Alexander finally looked up. You're free to refuse. No one's forcing you. And if I refuse, then my mother's heart breaks again, he said simply. And your mother's last wish dies with her. His honesty disarmed her. There was no manipulation in his tone, just resignation. She signed her name slowly, her handwriting trembling but firm. When the final paper was done, he slid a ring across the table, plain gold, unassuming. It's not for show, he said. It's for respect. She slipped it onto her finger. It felt heavier than she expected. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain began to patter against the window, soft and constant. He broke the silence first. You don't owe me love, he said quietly. She met his eyes, steady now. And you don't owe me pity. Something flickered there, something human, fleeting. He nodded once. A car will pick you up in 2 days. My mother wants you to stay at the estate until the ceremony. And you, she asked. I have work, he replied, standing. I always have work. She watched him leave the door, closing softly behind him. For a moment, the air seemed emptier, the city quieter. That night, back at the diner, Lena sat with Noah asleep in her lap. The rain tapped gently against the window, the same rhythm that had followed her for years. She turned the ring on her finger and whispered, It's not love, but maybe it's a beginning. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, tired but not defeated. She thought of the man whose eyes held more loneliness than arrogance, the one who hid behind duty, because he didn't know what else to believe in. Somewhere in the city, Alexander Montrose sat alone in his office, staring at the rain from his glass tower, the signed papers still on his desk. He told himself it was just another deal, another obligation fulfilled. Yet when he closed his eyes, The image that surfaced wasn't of contracts or signatures, but of a woman sitting in a small diner, her hands trembling as she chose a promise over pride. Voice over Emma. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something deeper, two lonely souls keeping a promise. Quote, highlight. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something deeper, two lonely souls keeping a promise. The wedding day arrived not with joy, but with quiet inevitability. The Montrose estate, usually reserved for galas and charity banquets, had been transformed into a garden ceremony, wrapped in soft white flowers, and the hum of press cameras outside the gates. The morning sky hung heavy with gray clouds, as if the heavens themselves weren't sure what to make of this union. Lena stood before the mirror in a lace gown Eleanor had chosen. Her reflection both foreign and fragile. The dress was beautiful, understated, but she felt like a visitor in someone else's dream. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the small pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. Noah sat on the bed behind her, swinging his legs and holding a tiny bouquet Eleanor had given him. "Mama, are you a princess now?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent wonder. Lena smiled faintly at his reflection, something like that sweet heart, but inside she felt the weight of something far from magic, an agreement sealed not with love but with legacy. Downstairs, Alexander adjusted the cufflinks on his sleeves, while the butler handed him the vows printed on crisp paper. He didn't read them. They were meaningless words for a ceremony built on promises he hadn't chosen. He caught his reflection in the mirror's sharp lines. Perfect posture, the look of a man who controlled everything except his own heart. Eleanor entered the room quietly. "You look like your father," she said softly. "He didn't believe in love either." Alexander turned his tone dry. "And you're still convinced this will make things better?" "It will make things right," she corrected gently. "Your father built walls. I'm asking you to build something that lasts." He exhaled slowly and nodded. "Then let's finish it." The ceremony began under a white arch draped in roses. Only a handful of guests attended, family, friends, board members, a few journalists who had promised discretion. The murmur of gossip still buzzed like static. "She's just a waitress," someone whispered, "and with a child. How disgraceful." "It's a charity marriage," another said. "He's doing it to please his mother." Lena felt their words like stones against her skin, but she stood tall, holding Noah's hand until the boy was led to his seat. Eleanor watched her proudly, unaware of the murmurs. Alexander's gaze found Lena's across the aisle. For a heartbeat, time seemed to still. She looked fragile, almost translucent in the soft light, but her eyes were steady. The officiant began to speak. The words drifted through the air like dust motes phrases about honor and duty, about promises kept. When it came time for the vows, Alexander's voice was low controlled. "I take you, Lena Hart, to be my wife, to keep the promise my mother made to yours, and to protect you as my name protects my own." His words were careful, precise, stripped of emotion. Lena's turn came, and her voice shook just once. "I take you, Alexander Montrose, to be my husband, to keep faith with a promise I didn't make, but one I now carry with my heart." She slipped the ring onto his finger. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and for a moment there was silence before the faint sound of a camera shutter. They kissed, not passion, not tenderness, just formality. The applause that followed was polite, distant. At the reception held inside the mansion, Lena felt the stares of everyone around her. Laughter drifted like smoke, but it never reached her. She stood near the window, watching Noah chase bubbles in the garden, the hem of her dress brushing the floor. Alexander joined her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to stay long," he said. "These people feed on appearances." She turned to him, her voice soft. "And what do you feed on Mr. Montrose?" His jaw tightened, a hint of a smile, flickering and dying. Silence. "It's the only thing that doesn't lie." She looked away. "Then I suppose we'll get along just fine." He didn't reply. As the evening darkened, the guests began to leave. The photographers were escorted out. The mansion fell into a strange quiet, like the pause between heartbeats. Eleanor kissed Lena on the cheek, whispering, "Thank you for giving this family a second chance." Her words were full of faith, but they carried the weight of hope misplaced. When Eleanor retired to her room, only Alexander and Lena remained in the vast house. The silence between them was thick with distance. "Your room is upstairs, second on the right," he said formally. "If you need anything, there's staff on call." Lena nodded, clutching the edge of her gown. "And you, I'll be in the study." He turned to leave, but something in her voice stopped him. "Mr. Montrose," she said quietly. He paused. "Yes." She met his gaze, her eyes shining with something undefinable fear, maybe courage. "Thank you for keeping your mother's promise." His reply came after a moment's hesitation. "I'm not sure I did it for her." Then he walked away. Later that night, Lena stood by the window of her new room, still in her wedding dress, the pearls cool against her skin. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady and unrelenting. The city lights shimmered through the droplets like distant stars. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered to her reflection, "I'm someone's wife, but nobody's beloved." Downstairs, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring into the fire. The flame flickered across his face, catching the faintest trace of weariness in his eyes. He didn't know why he kept thinking of the look on her face at the altar, or the way her voice trembled when she said his name. He told himself it didn't matter. It couldn't matter. He had fulfilled the promise. And yet, somewhere deep inside the fortress of his composure, a small crack had begun to form. Voice over Emma. "Some vows are whispered to God, not to each other." Quote highlight. "Some vows are whispered to God, not to each other." The house was silent except for the steady rhythm of the rain, tapping against the windows. The wedding had ended hours ago, but Lena couldn't sleep. The gown had been replaced by a simple nightdress, her hair let loose down her back. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the gold band on her ring finger, the symbol of a promise she didn't fully understand. Downstairs, Alexander worked late in his study, surrounded by files and flickering light from the fireplace. He had tried to lose himself in contracts, but every few minutes his mind drifted upstairs. He told himself it was curiosity, not care. When the clock struck midnight, he finally set his pen down and stood. His reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. He loosened his tie, the rain outside echoing the restless beat of his thoughts. Upstairs, Lena heard the soft creak of footsteps in the hallway. Her heart jumped, but she stayed still. The door opened quietly, and Alexander stepped inside. He didn't knock. His voice was calm, careful. "Mother asked that we appear as a real couple, at least for a while. The staff will talk otherwise." Lena rose from the bed, her bare feet brushing against the cold floor. "If that's what she wants," she said softly. He took a step closer. "I don't intend to force anything. I just thought we should at least speak." The air between them felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. She nodded, her hands clasped together. "You don't need to explain yourself, Mr. Montrose. I understand this isn't a marriage born of affection." "Alexander," he corrected gently. "If we're to pretend, you might as well use my name." She hesitated, then said it. "Alexander." It sounded fragile, unfamiliar. His gaze softened for a moment. He noticed the way her hair caught the dim light, the way her shoulders trembled slightly, though the room was warm. He wanted to look away but couldn't. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You've had a long day." "I can't," she admitted. "It feels strange to belong somewhere that doesn't feel like mine." "You belong here," he said automatically, but even he didn't believe it. She turned toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like tears. "Do I?" she whispered. "Or am I just here because of a promise he didn't answer?" The silence between them deepened thick and fragile. Then, as if drawn by something neither could name, he stepped closer. The soft scent of her hair reached him, something simple, lavender and rain. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "I won't pretend to know you, but I want to understand the woman who made my mother believe in love again." She looked at him, then startled by the sincerity in his tone. "There's nothing to understand. I'm not special. You are," he said almost to himself. His hand brushed against hers and she froze. For a moment the world outside disappeared. Only the rain, the breath between them, the heartbeat she could hear in her ears. His hand lingered at her wrist, warm and uncertain. She drew in a shaky breath. "Please don't do this out of obligation." "I'm not," he said softly. "At least, I don't think I am anymore." But then something in her eyes stopped him. Fear, vulnerability. Her shoulders trembled, and she took a small step back. I've never been with anyone," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. His body went still. For a moment he thought he'd misheard her. "Never." She shook her head, her eyes wide, her breath unsteady. "I know what people think about Noah and me, but it isn't true. I just couldn't." The admission hung between them, like fragile glass, one wrong word, and it would shatter. Alexander's expression changed, the arrogance fading into something tender, something uncertain. "The child," he said slowly, "he isn't yours." Lena's eyes glistened. "No, I found him. Years ago. It was raining like tonight. Someone left him outside the diner, wrapped in a blanket, crying. I called for help, but no one came, so I stayed. I held him until morning, and I couldn't give him away after that." Her voice cracked. "He didn't choose to be abandoned. I couldn't let him feel it again." Alexander's throat tightened. The image of her in the rain, holding a baby she didn't owe anything to, burned itself into his mind. "You've been saving others all your life," he murmured. "Who's ever saved you?" She gave a small, broken smile. "Maybe kindness doesn't need saving." The words struck him like truth and sorrow combined. Without thinking, he reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. Her eyes fluttered closed at the touch. "Lena," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't have to be afraid of me." She opened her eyes and something shifted. He saw not fragility, but quiet strength. The kind that endures storms without breaking. The kind he'd never known. He stepped back, his breath uneven. "Good night," he said softly. "You should sleep." "Good night, Alexander," she replied, her voice trembling but calm. He turned to leave, but at the door he paused and looked back. She was sitting again, her face half hidden in the dim glow of the lamp. He wanted to say something, anything, but there was nothing left that words could fix. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming like the pulse of a heart learning to beat again. As he walked down the hall, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He was thinking about a woman who found a child in the rain and raised him out of love, not blood. And for the first time, he wondered what it would feel like to be chosen that way. Voice over Emma. He went to bed with duty and woke up to compassion. Quote highlight. He went to bed with duty and woke up to compassion. The morning after the storm carried the scent of clean air and wet soil through the open windows of the Montrose estate. For the first time since her arrival, Lena woke to the sound of laughter echoing down the hall. It was Noah. She rushed out still in her robe to find the boy sitting on the marble floor with a toy car Alexander had bought him some time before dawn. The billionaire crouched beside him, his tie still loosened, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked impossibly different from the man who had stood at the altar 2 nights ago. There was no formality in him now, only quiet patience, as he listened to Noah talk about his dream of owning a red car one day. When Lena appeared, Alexander straightened and offered her a small smile that almost felt human. He woke early, he said simply. I didn't want him to wake you. He's not used to silence, she replied. Neither am I, he murmured. The words slipped out before he could catch them. Their eyes met, and something fragile passed between them, like sunlight filtering through mist. He left for the city shortly after, but that morning stayed with her. When he returned late that night, she found herself waiting by the window, unsure why. He came home tired, his expression clearer than before. She asked if he wanted dinner, and when he nodded, they ate together for the first time, seated at a long table, meant for 20 people, but filled only by 2. The conversation was awkward at first, pauses, too long, words too few, but eventually laughter found its way in. She told him about the diner, the regulars who argued about baseball and politics, the smell of bacon grease that never washed out of her apron. He told her about his father, a man who believed love was a weakness. He built this empire, Alexander said, glancing around the massive dining room, but I think he forgot what he was building it for. Maybe you can remember for him, Lena said gently. He looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment the cold edge of his eyes melted. Maybe, he said. Days began to pass in quiet rhythm. Eleanor's health was improving, and Lena often spent the afternoons reading to her in the garden while Alexander worked from home. Sometimes she caught him watching them through the window, a look of something almost wistful on his face. He joined them one day pretending to check on his mother, but ended up sitting on the grass beside Noah, helping him build a small tower of stones. The boy giggled every time it fell. Alexander laughed too, a sound so rare it made Eleanor tear up silently. That evening, after Eleanor had gone to rest, Lena thanked him for spending time with Noah. He shrugged. He's easy to be around. Children usually are, she said softly. They don't expect perfection, just presence. That's a luxury in my world, he said. So is kindness, she answered. He didn't reply, but later that night he found himself standing outside her room again, just for a moment, listening to the faint sound of her reading a bedtime story to the boy. Her voice was calm, steady, full of tenderness. He turned away, but the sound followed him into his dreams. A week later, a small accident changed everything. Noah fell while playing near the lake and scraped his knee badly. Lena panicked, calling for Alexander, her voice trembling. When he arrived, he didn't hesitate. He lifted Noah in his arms, carried him inside, and knelt to clean the wound himself. "It's okay, little man," he said, his tone gentle, almost fatherly. "You're brave." Noah sniffled. "Will it hurt?" "Just a little," Alexander said, "but you'll be fine. You've got the strongest mom in the world." Lena froze, tears stinging her eyes. When he looked up, their gazes met, and in that second, something unspoken shifted. An invisible line between duty and affection blurred into nothing. She whispered, "Thank you." He smiled faintly. "For what?" "For seeing him," she said. He didn't understand at first, but later, as he watched her tuck Noah into bed, he realized what she meant. Most people saw the child as a burden, a question, a story whispered behind hands. But she loved him as if he had been chosen by destiny itself, and now without meaning to, Alexander did too. That night they drove together to the edge of the estate, where the road curved toward the city lights. She sat in the passenger seat, quiet, watching the reflection of street lights on the rain-wet pavement. He spoke after a long silence. "Do you ever regret it, finding him?" she asked. "No, he saved me." "How I was lost," she said softly. "I thought my life would always be about survival. Then one night I heard a cry in the rain, and I realized I could be someone's hope. That changed everything." He nodded, eyes on the road, his voice low. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," she replied, "but it's worth it." When they reached the house, she had fallen asleep against the window. He turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, just looking at her. There was something peaceful about the way her hand rested near her heart, something honest and pure. He wanted to touch her to memorize this version of peace, but instead he leaned closer and whispered, "You're not as cold as you want to be." Her eyes fluttered open, dazed. "And you're braver than you know," she murmured back. They both smiled, small and unsure. Later, as he walked her inside, she stumbled slightly, and without thinking, he caught her. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the quiet, steady rhythm beneath. They stood like that, for a heartbeat too long, the silence between them filled with everything neither dared to say. When she finally stepped back, her voice was barely a whisper. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Lena," he replied, but his voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. Voice over Emma. "Sometimes love grows in silence between breaths, between fears." Quote highlight. "Sometimes love grows in silence between breaths, between fears." It started on a Monday morning, the kind that arrived too early and too bright. Alexander had just left for a board meeting when his phone began to vibrate relentlessly. His assistant's voice on the other end was tight. "Sir, there's something you need to see." Within an hour, the news had spread across every financial network in the country. Montrose heirs marriage a lie. DNA test reveals shocking truth. The article claimed that Noah wasn't adopted, but born from an affair between Lena and a former employee of the Montrose company. There were photographs grainy, manipulated, but believable enough to ignite a storm. Social media exploded with judgment. Headlines screamed. Talk shows dissected their lives. The story that had once been a promise of compassion turned into a scandal, dripping with cruelty. By noon, Alexander's office was under siege with reporters, and his company's stock had dropped 8%. He slammed the newspaper onto his desk, his jaw clenched. "Find out who leaked this." "Already working on it, sir," his assistant said. "But there's more. Someone claiming to be the boy's biological father contacted us." He's threatening to go public unless he's paid." The room spun for a second. Alexander's vision tunneled rage flooding his veins. "Get him on the phone," he snapped. But before that could happen, another call came, through his mother's nurse, frantic. "It's Mrs. Montrose, sir. She's collapsed. We're taking her to the hospital now." The air left his lungs. He drove there himself, ignoring the rain that had started again, the world blurring past in gray streaks. When he arrived, the doctors were still working. Lena sat in the waiting area, her face, pale eyes swollen. "What happened?" he demanded. "She fainted after seeing the news," Lena whispered. "She thought it was true, Alexander. She thought I lied. Did you?" The question came out sharper than he intended. She stared at him, stunned. "You think I would do that?" "I don't know what to think," he said coldly. "Everything I've built is crumbling because of you. Because of me." Her voice broke. "I didn't ask for this life. You wanted to keep a promise. I just wanted to keep a child safe." His eyes flashed. "Safe? You've brought scandal into my family, my company." "Your company," she interrupted, trembling. "What about your mother? What about Noah, who's terrified right now? Because people with cameras are shouting outside our house. Do you even care what this is doing to him?" He looked away, jaw tight, but his silence was an answer she couldn't forgive. Hours later, when Eleanor stabilized, Alexander went back to the mansion. Paparazzi crowded the gate, flashes of light reflecting off wet pavement. Inside, Lena packed a small bag for Noah, her hands shaking. She didn't look up when he entered the room. "You're leaving?" he asked. "You should be relieved," she said quietly. "The problem's walking out your door. You think running away will fix this?" "No," she said, turning to face him, her eyes red but steady. "But staying will destroy what little dignity I have left. I can't live in a house where I'm treated like a lie." "You are not." He stopped the word, dying on his tongue. "Then what am I? Alexander, a wife, a name on paper, or a headline that embarrasses you?" He had no answer. The silence between them screamed louder than the storm outside. She zipped the bag and lifted Noah into her arms. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck, his small face pressed against her shoulder. Alexander reached out instinctively, but stopped himself. "Where will you go? Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere the truth doesn't need defending." He wanted to stop her, to tell her that he didn't mean the things he'd said, but pride held his tongue. The door closed behind her with the finality of a verdict. That night, Alexander sat alone in the study. The house felt enormous, empty, the sound of rain filling every corner. He poured himself another drink and stared at the photographs scattered across his desk, the same manipulated images that had ruined everything. His assistant's voice echoed in his head, someone claiming to be the boy's father. He picked up his phone and called the private investigator he'd used before. "I want the truth," he said. "All of it. You might not like it," the man warned. "Find it anyway." Meanwhile, Lena and Noah checked into a small motel an hour outside the city. The neon sign outside flickered weakly against the rain. Noah slept beside her, his small hand clutching hers. She sat awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of thunder rolling like judgment. Everything felt surreal, the headlines, the betrayal, the emptiness of promises that had once felt sacred. She had trusted Alexander, not for his wealth, but for the quiet kindness she thought she'd seen behind his walls. Now she wasn't sure if that man had ever existed. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering, "You said I belonged. Was that just another lie?" Back at the estate, Alexander's investigator called near dawn. I found him. The man claiming to be the father, his name's Blake Carson. Criminal record fraud extortion. He's been selling stories for years. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. You're sure positive? He was the one who left the baby at the diner 4 years ago. We've got proof. The kid's not his. The boy isn't hers either, but she told the truth all along. For a long moment, Alexander couldn't speak. His chest ached as the realization hit. He had doubted her. He had driven her away. The next morning, he went to the hospital. His mother was awake, weak but alert. You look like your father, she said faintly. But he never came back after hurting the one who loved him. Don't make the same mistake. He kissed her hand, guilt burning through him. I already have, he whispered. Then undo it, she said, before the rain stops. That night, Alexander stood at the window, rain streaking down the glass, like tears he refused to shed. The house echoed with silence, the kind that followed words spoken too harshly to take back. He thought of Lena's voice, trembling when she said she didn't ask for this life, of Noah's small face pressed into her shoulder, of the way she had looked at him with both fear and hope. Somewhere in that memory, his heart cracked open. He picked up his keys and walked into the rain. Voiceover Emma. When lies scream louder than love's silence becomes unbearable. Quote, highlight. When lies scream louder than love's silence becomes unbearable. The storm had been raging for hours by the time Alexander found the old diner, the same one from the photograph his mother had once shown him. Its neon sign flickered weakly through the downpour, the letters half burned out, spelling only DNR against the darkness. Rainwater soaked his suit as he stepped out of the car headlights, cutting through the fog. His knuckles were white around the steering wheel before he forced himself to move. She had to be here. She had nowhere else to go. The bell above the diner door chimed weakly as he entered, and for a moment the smell of coffee and fried onions filled the air like memory. The booths were empty, except for one in the far corner. Lena sat there, her hair damp, her sweater clinging to her shoulders, Noah curled asleep beside her under her coat. The sight of them stopped him cold. He stood for a moment, unsure what to say, every word feeling smaller than the weight of what he'd done. She looked up, eyes wide, but not surprised. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. You made yourself clear. He swallowed hard, stepping closer. I was wrong. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign but true. The man who claimed to be Noah's father. He's a criminal, a liar. I have proof. You told the truth, Lena. You always did. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable, her hands resting protectively over the boy. And now that you know, she whispered, what difference does it make? The damage is done. He took another step closer, his voice breaking. It makes every difference. You didn't deserve what I said. What I did. She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. You didn't just doubt me, Alexander. You doubted everything that made us real. There was never a us, he said, before he could stop himself. But the moment the words left his mouth, he saw the pain flash in her eyes, and his chest twisted. I didn't mean that, he whispered. I don't know how to undo what I broke. You can't? She said simply. Trust isn't a switch you flip when you decide to believe again. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows in wild rhythm. He looked at her, every inch of his composure stripped away. You once told me you found Noah in the rain, he said quietly. Maybe I'm here to be found the same way. She turned her face away, her breath shaky. It's not that easy, I know, he said, but I have to try. He sank to his knees beside the booth, the cold floor soaking through his clothes, his voice low and raw. I should have protected you, not destroyed you. I let pride speak louder than the truth. I'm so sorry, Lena. The sound of his voice cracked something inside her that had been holding for too long. She stared down at him, this man who once seemed untouchable, now kneeling in a pool of rainwater, looking up at her like a sinner begging for absolution. For the first time since she left the mansion, she saw the truth in his eyes. Not power, not wealth, but regret. You can't protect someone you don't trust, she said quietly, and I did trust you. Then let me earn it back, he whispered. Let me try, even if it takes forever. She studied him through the blur of her tears. Why? Because I can't breathe, knowing I hurt the only person who ever made me feel human. The rain beat harder against the glass, as if echoing the chaos inside them. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his hair, and he closed his eyes at the touch. You're soaked, she said, her voice trembling. So are you, he replied, and something fragile, something living sparked between them again. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was full of forgiveness, waiting to be spoken, of love waiting to be reborn. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake. He stood and took her hand, pulling her gently to her feet. She hesitated only a moment before letting him. Come home, he said softly. Not because of a promise, because I want you there. She looked at him, searching his face for the lie that wasn't there. And if I say no, then I'll wait here until the rain stops, he said simply. Even if it takes all night. Her lips trembled, the smallest smile breaking through. You'd freeze. Then I'll freeze, knowing I finally meant something. She didn't answer, only walked past him to the door. When she opened it, wind swept through the diner, carrying the scent of rain and redemption. She stepped outside and he followed. The storm wrapped around them cold and wild, but it no longer felt cruel. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. He drew her close, his forehead against hers, the world dissolving into the sound of rain. You've lost so much, she whispered. Why risk more? Because I finally know what I stand to lose if I don't, he said. His voice broke, and she felt the truth in it. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Alexander, she whispered, and it was enough. He kissed her then, gentle at first, almost reverent, the rain, slipping between them like liquid light. It wasn't the desperate kind of kiss born of lust or pity. It was the quiet kind, the kind that said, I see you and I still choose you. When they finally broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The storm began to fade, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and whispered, Let's go home. Voice over Emma. The rain didn't stop that night, but neither did their hearts. Quote, highlight. The rain didn't stop that night, but neither did their hearts. The year that followed was the quiet kind of miracle that didn't ask for applause. The world forgot the scandal long before Alexander and Lena did, but the pain it left behind became the soil where something better grew. The Montrose estate had changed. The halls that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, the small, bright kind that came from a 4-year-old boy running through the garden with a kite. Noah's kite dipped and twirled in the wind while Lena watched from the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The morning sun painted everything gold, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that peace could be permanent. Alexander stood behind her, his tie loosened a faint smile, tugging at his lips as he watched their son, because that was what he called Noah now without hesitation. "He's getting better," Lena said softly. "He used to trip every 3 steps. Alexander chuckled. "He's your son, determined." She turned to him, eyes playful. "Yours too, stubborn." He leaned against the railing beside her. "I'll take that as a compliment." They shared a small smile, one born of shared battles, not fairy tales. It had been a long year of rebuilding trust-love and the simple rhythm of a family that had once been impossible. After the truth came out, Alexander had stepped down temporarily from the board, choosing instead to focus on what really mattered. He founded a charitable trust called the Rainlight Foundation, named for the night he found her again. The foundation's mission was simple: to support children who had been abandoned, just like Noah once had been. Every month they visited shelters together. Lena cooked Alexander, read to the kids, and Noah handed out small handmade toys that he insisted were lucky charms. The media called it redemption. They called it living. One summer afternoon, Lena opened her own small diner in the same lakeside town where everything had started. She named it Noah's Promise. The opening day drew locals and strangers alike, the smell of apple pie filling the air. The sign above the door shimmered under the sunlight. Hand-painted and imperfect, but beautiful. Alexander helped carry in boxes, sleeves rolled, ignoring the curious stares of townsfolk, still half in disbelief that the Billionaire had traded boardrooms for pancakes. "Do you ever miss it?" Lena asked, leaning on the counter as the first customers arrived. "The noise, the power." He smiled faintly. "I thought power meant control. Now it means having something worth losing." She reached across the counter, brushing his hand. "You sound like someone who's finally learned to live." "I learned from you," he said simply. The words hung in the air, fragile but true. That evening, when the diner closed, they took a walk along the lake. The air smelled of pine and dusk. Noah ran ahead, chasing dragonflies, his laughter echoing across the water. "You know," Lena said quietly, "sometimes I still think about the night you found us. How cold it was, how tired I was, and how stubborn you were," he added. She smiled. "You weren't much better." They stopped near the old bench by the dock where she used to watch the sunrise before everything changed. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd always fit. "I thought love was a weakness," he said, "something to protect myself from. But I was wrong. It was the only thing strong enough to make me human again." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the soft wind tugging at her hair. "And now," he whispered, "I don't ever want to live without it." She looked up at him, eyes glistening with quiet joy. "Then don't." Behind them, Noah called out, "Mom, Dad, look." He was holding a tiny frog in his hands, grinning wide. The word Dad hit Alexander's heart like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It was the first time Noah had said it without hesitation, and Alexander could only nod his throat too tight to speak. "That's a fine catch," he finally managed. "Just don't let him hop into the house." Noah laughed, running ahead, again the frog safe in his palms. Lena watched them, her heart full. "He's happy," she said softly. "So are we," Alexander replied. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A few weeks later, Eleanor joined them at the diner. She had recovered fully, her hair silver and elegant, her smile softer than it had been in years. She watched Noah serve pie slices to customers and whispered, "Now I can rest easy. The promise is complete." Lena looked at her emotions swelling in her chest. "You saved us," she said. Eleanor shook her head. "No, my dear, you saved him." She glanced at her son, who was helping Noah wipe a spill, laughter in his eyes. "He used to live like a man, trying not to feel. Now look at him." That night, as they drove home, the world outside their car was quiet. The road curved along the lake, the reflection of the moon shimmering across the water. Lena reached over and rested her hand on Alexander's. He turned his palm upward, intertwining their fingers. No words were needed. The silence between them was full of everything they had built: trust, forgiveness, family. As the estate came into view, Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat, his small head leaning against the window. Alexander parked the car and turned off the engine, watching him for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Lena smiled softly. "Every day, but I wouldn't change a thing." He nodded, his voice quiet. "Neither would I." She leaned over, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "You kept your promise." "Alexander Montrose." He smiled. "No, Lena, you did." The night air was cool as they stepped inside, the faint scent of rain drifting through open windows. Alexander carried Noah to his room, tucking him under the covers before pausing at the door. Lena watched him, her heart swelling at the sight. For a man who once built empires, he looked most complete in that small, ordinary moment. When he turned, their eyes met, and neither spoke. They didn't need to. Theirs was a love that didn't need to prove itself. It existed quietly, in gestures, in faith, in the space between forgiveness and forever. Voice over Emma. He kept a promise for the dead and found life among the living. Quote highlight. He kept a promise for the dead and found life among the living. The snow came early that winter, drifting like quiet confessions over the Montrose estate. The lake had frozen at its edges, and from the porch the world looked silver and still. Inside, the warmth of a fire painted the walls with amber light. Lena sat by the window, writing in her journal, as Noah built towers of wooden blocks near the hearth. Alexander entered quietly, watching them for a moment before speaking. "You still write every morning." She smiled without looking up. "Old habit. It helps me remember who I was before all of this." "And who are you now?" he asked. She closed the journal and met his eyes. Someone who finally stopped running. He walked closer, kneeling beside her chair. "You saved more than a boy, Lena. You saved me." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "No, Alexander, you saved yourself. I just stood beside you while you remembered how." Outside, the snow kept falling soft and unhurried. The sound of Noah's laughter filled the room, bright and untamed. For a moment, everything felt suspended. No past, no scandal, no promises owed, just love, simple and alive. Weeks later, the family gathered at the grand opening of the Rainlight Foundation's new center in New York. The building shimmered with glass and light, but inside it was filled with warmth, a mural painted by children, a wall of names honoring the ones who had been lost and found. Cameras flashed as Alexander gave a short speech. When this began, he said, voice steady, it was just an attempt to make things right. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. It became a reminder that love can build what power can't. His eyes found Lena's in the crowd. This foundation is for those who were left behind and for those who found the courage to love them anyway." Applause filled the hall, but Lena's heart was too full to clap. She could only smile. That night, after the guests had gone, they walked along the empty hallway together, the city lights flickering through the glass. "Your father would have been proud," she said. "Maybe," he murmured, "but I think he would have been confused first." She laughed softly. "Good. Let him be. Confusion is where change begins." They paused at the mural wall where dozens of tiny handprints covered the paint. Noah had pressed his there earlier right next to Alexander's. 2 prints side by side, one small and messy, one large and precise. "It suits us," she said quietly. "Imperfect but together. Like our story," he said. She turned to him, her eyes luminous in the low light. "You ever think about how it started? 2 strangers making promises they didn't believe in. And now," she whispered, "we keep them for love." He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, slow and sure. "You can't buy love," he said, "but you can choose to keep it." Months passed, and life settled into something ordinary but sacred. Mornings began with pancakes at the diner, afternoons at the foundation, evenings spent reading by the fire. They still argued sometimes about business, about Noah staying up too late, about Lena sneaking too much sugar into the coffee. But those moments had their own kind of beauty. Love wasn't perfect here, it was real. One evening in late spring, as the first thunder rolled beyond the hills, Lena stood by the window, watching rain streak across the glass. Alexander came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You still love the rain," he murmured. "It reminds me of beginnings," she said, "of second chances." He kissed her shoulder lightly. "And of forgiveness." She nodded, mostly forgiveness. They stood in silence, the rhythm of the rain syncing with the rhythm of their breathing. Somewhere behind them, Noah's voice called out from the living room. "Dad, Mom, come see." They turned to find him holding up a drawing, a family of 3 standing under a rainbow. A house behind them, a dog they didn't own yet. "It's us," Noah said proudly. "But next time can we get a puppy?" Alexander laughed, kneeling beside him. "We'll see, champ. That's a big promise. You're good at keeping those," Noah said. Alexander froze for a second, then smiled, a tear threatening to break free. "I try." That night, after putting Noah to bed, Alexander found Lena sitting outside on the porch steps, the moonlight touching her face. "You'll catch cold," he said softly, draping his coat over her shoulders. She looked up at him. "Do you ever wonder why life chose this path for us?" "I used to," he admitted. "Now I think we chose it ourselves the moment we said yes to something bigger than comfort." "And what's that?" she asked. He took her hand, pressing it against his heart. "Love. The kind you can't buy. The kind that costs everything but gives it all back." She leaned in, resting her head against his chest. The world was quiet, except for the wind rustling through the trees. For a while, neither spoke. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove, only gratitude that they had survived long enough to find what so many people never do. "Sometime after midnight," she whispered, "do you ever think about the promise?" He smiled into her hair. "Every day, but not the one between our mothers, the one between us. That no matter how broken the world gets, we'll stay kind." "You've kept it," she said. "So have you." He tilted her chin and kissed her softly, a promise renewed without words. The next morning, the first snow of spring melted on the roof of the diner. A handwritten sign hung by the window that read, "Open Hearts Welcome Here." Inside, Lena served coffee to an old couple while Alexander helped Noah with his homework at the counter. The television above the bar played a news feature about the Rainlight Foundation, the anchor calling it a revolution of compassion. Lena glanced at the screen, then back at the two most important people in her life, and whispered, "A revolution, maybe. But to us, it's just home." Alexander looked up from the notebook, catching her gaze. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That everything started with a promise. Made in a hospital room," she said. "And somehow it led us here." "Here," he repeated, smiling. "Exactly where we were meant to be." As evening fell, they walked together to the lake, now thawed and glistening beneath the golden sky. Noah ran ahead, his laughter echoing across the water. Alexander and Lena followed, their hands brushing their hearts steady. When they reached the dock, she turned to him with a gentle smile. "You ever wonder what people will remember about us? Maybe that we learned how to love without conditions," he said. "Or maybe," she replied, "they'll just remember that we tried." He took her hand and lifted it to his lips. Trying was enough. The last light of day spilled across the water, turning it into liquid gold. Noah shouted from the end of the dock, "Come on, the sunset's waiting." They laughed, running to join him, the sound of their joy carried away by the wind. Voice over Emma. He agreed to marry her for duty, but that night he learned what love truly means. Because sometimes love isn't found in perfect places, it's found in promises kept in hearts forgiven. Tell me, would you marry someone to honor a promise and stay for love? Leave a heart in the comments if you believe kindness still exists. Don't forget to subscribe and share this story if it touched your heart. The screen fades to the image of the diner under gentle snowfall, its sign glowing softly, Noah's promise. Emma's voice returns quiet and full of warmth. Love, the only promise worth keeping. Quote highlight: "You can't buy love, but you can choose to keep it."